feet per year project. And then we can talk a little bit about expansion. Pure Water Monterey, we did circle back with geotechnical folks on the Vado zone wells, the shallow wells. There's some discussion about going underneath the pads that carry the wellhead and shoring those up. So that's currently on a path to kind of be finally decided shortly. In the meantime, both wells remain off. The deep well, we've been noticing a slight loss in productivity, but we did do, and I'm going to get this number wrong, I think it was 214 acre feet in the month of April, for which we've received an invoice. We're up over 300 and some odd acre feet. Maureen, are you on yet? John, do you know if Maureen's going to be on?
I believe she was the second MPWMD staff that left the room.
Or is she calling in? Can you unmute caller 2, Arlene? Or can she unmute herself if that is? No? Caller 4, is that you, Maureen? And caller,
hear me?
There we go. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, the meeting password has letter digits that's beyond my ability to make work on my iPhone.
So I don't know if you've heard everything today. I'd like a little bit more of an update on the existing project, the geotech on the Vado zone wells, and I had just broached the subject of production for the month of April overall, but primarily in the 2 deep wells, since the Vado zone wells were off for the entire month. Maureen? Arlene, did we mute her by inadvertently? Or did she go off? She might have been the one who's labeled 4. Oh, there's Maureen. Well, with that, while we're waiting to see if Maureen's ready to come back online, the one thing I did want to broach with this committee is, for purposes of redundancy and maintenance and overall productivity, we are contemplating adding a 3rd deep well to the phase 1 project. That would result, after doing some initial borings to see if one of the locations actually down near the percolation pond would work. Suffice to say that we will be putting that project in the budget. We're pulling together the annual budget material actually this week. So we'll be putting in a placeholder, and then we'll talk about it in greater detail at either the next or the following water supply planning committee meeting. On the expansion, unless you were not sheltered in place and traveling abroad, I'm sure you know that the final supplemental EIR was not certified by the Monterey One Water Board on April 27th. On May 1st, this board did send a letter asking for specific identification of the deficiencies and some remedies, and to readdress. We've requested that it be brought back for certification, or whatever action will be needed with those deficiencies addressed within 30 days. And we've requested within a 10-day period of Friday last week, direction from their board as to whether they're willing to do so. So that's hanging out there at this point. And absent Maureen suddenly materializing, that's all I have.
I think I suddenly materialized.
Hey, The two things I kind of left out were what if there is a schedule for the geotech on the Vado Zone wells, and whether you've got an actual number for total injection to date, and anything else you want to bring to us.
The geotech, it was supposed to have the report end of this week. They are trying to slip that into next week, and I'm trying to bring it back in to the end of this week. Total injection numbers, I apologize, I don't have that at this point in time, and I apologize, I've forgotten your third ask.
I think I left it at that. If there was anything else you might want to add.
No, thank you.
Okay, any questions from the committee?
I have a couple of questions on the sinkhole. It's the injection wells, is that correct?
Yeah, they're the Vado Zone, the shallow injection wells.
Is that a common occurrence in a sandy area like that or not? What do you think?
I think it's more likely in a sandy area. You get some liquefaction going, and but I don't know, John, you're the geoscientist here, and Maureen, you've been out in the field.
Yeah, Dave. These are the first wells of this kind that have been put into the Monterey Bay area. They have a lot of use of these wells in like Arizona and Nevada. And so it is very specific to the different types of geology. So with these being the first ones to go in this area, I don't know if I could say that it was a common occurrence that you would expect in this area or not, but it is an outcome that you can get with these type of wells.
Does that suggest any kind of I don't know, weakness or expectations in the shallow aquifer area, aquifer area?
If I may, in talking with the geotechs, both in the initial investigation of what we're now calling a surface subsidence, it looked like almost a textbook sinkhole because it was underneath about 6 inches of class 2 base. So what probably would have looked like a depression ended up looking like a hole because that class 2 base was providing a substantial amount of bridge capacity, top 6 inches of soil. At this point, based on the initial results from the comb penetrometer testing, it looks like the formation may be migrating either into the wellbore or the gravel pack, and that the amount of subsidence is going to be constrained to what's kind of slumping in, which is, in a sandy environment, you expect a certain amount of slumping. So again, based on how stable the earth was, not even a fair bit, I would say 5 feet out from the wellbore, everything's stable. It looks like this is well slumping that is manifesting in a surface subsidence, and that it will have a natural end.
And is fill the answer for now?
Yeah, as it continues to slump, we will continue to throw sand on top of it. But there's going to be a finite amount of slumping you're going to get out of this.
And Dave, going back to your comment about a third deep well, is the deep well kind of considered an alternative to a Vados well in order to get the water injected? Is there any relationship between going for a third well compared to this experience with Vados?
I would treat them differently. The Vado Zone wells are, I think originally, and John and Maureen chime in, were originally thought to do 30% of the work. Then it was 20%. I don't know if we arrived at 10%, but the deep wells really do the labor on getting the water into the aquifer. I can say that if you look at the water purchase agreement, there were 4 deep wells and 4 monitoring wells originally envisioned. Because water is extracted primarily from the Santa Margarita, which is deep, we wanted more water going into the deep. There's a couple of extraction wells I think are still screened in both. John, you can correct me on that, but the Paso Robles, which is the first aquifer under the dune sand, the aromas sands that Vado zone well is drilled into, is not the most productive of the Seaside groundwater basin sources. So most of our attention needs to be focused on the deep. And the deep has been doing, as I said, most of the work. In fact, all of the work in April's injection. It's just, I think we're beginning to see that if you had to take one of the deep off, you would really cut into your ability to inject. And so having some redundancy for the long term is probably the way to go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any committee members have questions?
I have just a curiosity question. Was there any choice that we had that to choose a different type of well when we put this one in, since it was unknown how it would work in the kind of soil that we have here?
Of course, there's always choices, but I think that, you know, the original intent was water can be produced from two separate strata, the Paso Robles aquifer, which is the shallower one, and then the Santa Margarita, which is, you know, sandstones, which are the deeper one, trying to find some balance. The Vado zone wells, by their design, are larger diameter. I don't know, John or Maureen, do you have the diameters on the difference between these? So they're shallower, but wider.
Wider. Mm-hmm.
The VZW2 is a 48-inch borehole, and VZW1B is a 36-inch. A lot of the problem was we just didn't have the land to put in infiltration basins, which are how they, you know, do this in some other areas. There was just no land available to us at that time.
And just by comparison, the diameter of the deep wells.
The deep wells would be about a 20 to 24-inch borehole. Or casing, excuse me.
Thank you.
Director Evans, do you have any questions, comments?
I do not. Thanks.
I just have one curiosity question on item B, which is the expansion. I'm sure is there any action, any acknowledgement of the letter from us to Monterey One Water? I know it's really soon. This is Monday. It went out Friday. Never mind my question.
No, their general manager has acknowledged receiving it and responding to inquiries about it.
Okay. Thank you for that. How about go to item number 3, update on the ASR project, please?
Yeah, and this will be marine primarily as well. What this is updating us on is the new chemical building. So when you saw the email I sent out earlier today on ASR injection for the season, praising John's team, John, Tom Lindberg, and Eric Loomis. Not only did they have to go through 2 months without rain, but they also were on an active construction site because of all the work that Maureen is managing at that site. So it was no small feat to get everything done and as effective as they did. So Maureen, if you could update us on the construction progress.
Yeah, if you've driven by, you'll see the block work on the building is largely complete. They were able to pour the equipment pads inside the building. For as long as I've been here, we've had 2 above ground pipes towards our entrance, and one of those above ground pipes was removed and replaced with underground pipe for the ASR 3-4 backflush, which certainly did make our operations job a lot harder when they were moving that underground. And they ran the main power conduit from the existing PG&E drop at the old building down to the new building. We'll be seeing a couple more change orders when I get together the AgCom staff note. And we've had a running change order total of about 25,000. We've now had time to process and negotiate several change orders. We like to package them together. So we have those initial about $25,000 worth of change orders that I've had in previous staff notes, in addition to another 22,000 for some excess soil movement using steel pipe above ground in lieu of ductile iron, and some exploratory potholing when one of our connection points came up very shallow. Additionally, we've received 4 notices of delay related to COVID-19. We're certainly keeping the pressure on the vendors and trying to readjust and juggle the schedule to get everything in that we can. Just doing everything we can to minimize the impact of that.
Any questions, comments from the committee?
I have a comment, if I may, Director Evan.
Yes.
I just want to commend the team for all the work that they did, both the injection team and Maureen for pushing this construction and getting this over the finish line. I know it's been difficult with the COVID situation, and everybody has performed admirably, and I'm very proud of this team. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Well, with all the demands on staff pulled in different directions, as well as restrictions on kind of getting the staff even into the field, it's been an experimental and a successful kind of new experience. Thank you for that. I haven't asked for public comment, but I will ask for public comment now if there's anyone that wants to comment. I'll go back to Pure Water Monterey Project as well, if there's any comment on that, which I didn't ask for, I'm sorry, but and also ASR. Does anyone from the public want to speak? I guess if there are no hands moving, that.
Yeah, I see no raised hands. I can check with the call-in, persons who called in.
Okay, we'll give you a moment for that.
All right. I'm unmuting call-in user number 2. Also Bowie. Did you have any comments?
All right.
No comments. Thank you.
Hearing none, we'll proceed with going to item number 4. Or I'm sorry, Director Adams, did you have any comments on ASR? Or maybe I forgot to ask, or did I not remember?
You're on mute.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. No, I did not have any questions.
All right, sorry. Okay, item number 4, review of calculating the compliance of the cease and desist order targets. The compliance question is related to how much water do we have in reserve or in our calculations that suggest that what's our response with CDO ramp downs. So, Mr. Stolt.
Yeah, and it's all summarized in Exhibit 4A, which I gave you some preliminary look at with not a whole lot of explanation, but I wanted to walk you through it. The July 2016 extension of the cease and desist order established what's called an effective diversion limit. And that is how much water is allowed to be pumped from the river. And there was quite a bit of discussion at that time. There were state water board members who thought the limit should be established at the most recent year's worth of pumping, to which the common comeback would be, the last year is not indicative of next year and not necessarily indicative of the year before. So let's look at some average. And so they settled on a 5-year average at that time. And that was the 8310 number. So that's how much pumping is allowed to occur from the Carmel River. What that means is the legal right is 3,376. So embedded in the 8310 is recognition that existing pumping exceeds the legal right, and here's all we're going to let you pump subject to certain conditions. You see the next line says penalty for missed milestones. Well, no milestone has been missed, so no penalty. But when a milestone is missed, if the executive director of the state board doesn't waive that reduction, then the first missed milestone would cost the community 1,000 acre feet. So then you'd see this chart, which is only populated once a year after the close of the water year. If you miss a milestone, you'd see 1,000 acre feet in there as a negative. Water produced by Sand City, not used by Sand City. So the Sand City entitlement was originally established at about 300 acre feet of expected production per year, 94 of which was immediately dedicated to offset the unlawful diversions from the river, which is why from time to time you'll see Sand City only credited for 94 acre feet against the problem. But until that time that the city uses up their entitlement, any water produced by Sand City that's not used by Sand City customers. And so if you were to go into the monthly allocation report, you can actually see how much of Sand City's entitlement's been used. And it's a very small number. It's on the order of 5 acre feet or something like that. So in this particular year, the 2019 water year, of the total production, and remember production was down, it's not 300 acre feet, it's not meeting its faceplate capacity. So 107 was assumed to be dedicated to the unlawful diversions from the river. So again, the effective diversion limit is reduced yet again for Sand City. Now as Pure Water Monterey comes online, at the end of the year, it'll be counted up as to how much was used for delivery to customer service, and that will be decremented from the 8310 as well. So the effect of Pure Water Monterey means the limits off the river start to go down. And then finally, an in-stream flow requirement carryover credit from previous water year. We currently don't have any in-stream flow requirements. This would be if you went out and got a forbearance agreement from a producer. You know, just as an example, Rancho Cañada had a limited period of time where credit was given for their lack of pumping. So another example would be if Cal-Am cut some form of deal with Carmel Valley Ranch as an example, or something like that. But presently there are no in-stream flow agreements that would create any number here. So with those modifications, your effective diversion limit from the river becomes this adjusted effective diversion limit. Then you go and look at what actually was produced in that same water year. And so that would be Cal-Am well production from all of their different source wells. And then similar to Sand City, but a little bit different, Malpaso water produced but not served to subscribers is also deemed to be Cal-Am pumping from the river just from a different location for their benefit. And so it is treated as an offset or an increment, additional Cal-Am pumping for Cal-Am's purposes. So if you remember, the Malpaso program has about 80 acre feet of entitlement. Only 30 or so at this time, 24 acre feet had been sold and were deemed to be serving subscribers. So the rest of it was deemed to be serving Cal-Am. So it was added to the well production. The Pebble Beach entitlement is given a safe haven or a carve out from production. So water served to Pebble Beach for the entitlements then is a reduction to the annual production. And then ASR injection in excess of 600 acre feet is also a deduction. What that means in kind of the converse is they count the first 600 acre feet as if it's Carmel River production for customer demand during a year. And then anything else, they allow you to take a reduction of your production credit for. So then you bring the two together with the adjusted effective diversion limit up at the top, the adjusted production, and then you look at the difference. And if the production exceeds the limit, then you would have a positive number in this production exceeding adjusted EDL. So think again, if there was 1,000 acre foot penalty for a missed milestone, that first number goes down. And if there was an uptick in demand or there were less Pebble Beach entitlements that were used or what have you, or ASR injection was a different number and the production limit were to go up, you're starting to put the squeeze on. But as of right now, as the last water year, the limit far exceeded the production on an adjusted basis. Then comes this figure called carryover credits. So if you needed to, you could apply some of your saved production. So in other words, in any year that your, and we'll see this in just a second, that your effective diversion limit exceeds your production, you get credit for that. That's water saved over that 5-year average that we might have anticipated that would need to be produced to meet demands. And somehow you came in under that, so now you're getting a credit for it. So in any given year, if you have a problem in meeting the effective diversion limit, because these numbers are squeezing together on top of each other, you can borrow from your bank up to 750 acre feet in that year. And as you can see, there was none needed in 2019 because production was way under the limit. So then you get your adjusted exceedance if you needed to add 750 or some measure up to that. And that tells you then how much production less than adjusted EDL you would have had. So in this case, well, actually that would have told you how much you exceeded it if you were over. In this particular water year, given the adjusted limit and the adjusted production, there was an excess of 1,400 acre feet. And the previous cumulative excess since the 2016 extension of the CDO went into place was already at 2,300. And so you can see the combined number, this cumulative carryover credit for future years, is a pretty significant number, this 3,742, which is there to apply against missed milestones. And again, going back to the milestone issue, if it's not the fault of the company, the mayor's authority, or the district, the executive director does have the authority to waive the milestone. But assume if they did not, if you did get into this mode where you needed to rely on carryover credits to break even, you could only take 750 acre feet thereof. But the 3,700 acre feet tells you, you were almost at a good 5-year bank of carryover credit at 750 acre feet available per year. We don't expect to ever need that. And then when we've had this discussion previously about a year and a half ago, while we recognize that there was quite a bit of carryover credit and quite a bit of room in between. So let's just say there was one missed milestone. And instead of this year having an excess of 1,408, or 9 rather, it was only 409. Well, that would tell you that you're starting to get squeezed a little bit. If you want another year with all the same conditions, but another missed milestone, then you'd actually be 600 acre feet short. And then you would need to rely on carryover credit and so on. And so this is how it would exacerbate itself going down the line. The one caveat is when we went through this a year plus ago, I think Director Evans, you were chair, so it was probably during your tenure. We said there is sufficient carryover based on current pumping and current demand. We look pretty good for a couple of years. And the reply from Cal-Am was yes, but, and we had, you have to look at the plumbing constraints, if you will. Can you get the water you have to where you need it? And I think that the plumbing constraints that we learned of at that time make it a little tighter situation than just these numbers. But this is how it works, and this is how you determine whether you're compliant for the year or not. So it's luckily it's a backward look from the end of the water year. You're not checking weekly or quarterly, which is important because the seasonality of the resource system matters. And then, as I said, always have to look at the plumbing constraints and whether you can move the water where you need the water. And that concludes my summary.
I have kind of a question on the numbers, not necessarily the meaning or the implication of the numbers, but how the numbers are derived. The effective diversion limit was based on a 5-year average that was kind of a negotiated process, but nevertheless, it ended up to be a number. The numbers that you add in as you calculate here, are they annual? Are they an average of some kind?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a little bit of mixing and matching going on. So let's say, take for example, Malpaso water produced, not served to subscribers. So each year, a Malpaso entitlement holder comes through our water demand division with plans and gets a permit and gets approval. Then we take that entitlement and we shift it to the subscriber side. And so if CalAm produces every year the full entitlement, call it 80 acre feet, with each permitted housing renovation or housing start that uses the entitlement, then the CalAm piece will go down. So it's a cumulative amount of entitlement that's been let out through time, offsetting the 80 acre feet that are available from that entitlement in any one year. So it's a single year number, but it's calculated against cumulative offset. And I believe Pebble Beach is supposed to work the same way, except it's not against all entitlements. It's against, it's accumulating entitlements that occurred since the 2016 water year when the CDO was extended. So there's no credit for what had happened prior to that. But then it is what that cumulative amount is deemed to occur each year as an annual amount. So that middle table, table 5B, the adjustments are kind of that mixture of how much of an accumulated amount are we counting in that year against an annual amount.
And a related question, these are numbers that are derived from water district information, monitoring, reporting, actual numbers that are reported by CalAm and so on. Does CalAm contest any of these numbers that you know of?
No. So we provide reports to CalAm for Malpaso and for Pebble Beach. They, I believe, separately report the setting of meters, which is always a flag because you're not supposed to be setting meters in a moratorium, which means they're usually for Malpaso customers or Pebble Beach customers, occasionally a Sand City entitlement customer. So they rely on our data for that. They have their own data for production, and they also have their own data for delivery for customer service. And so sometimes I would imagine in this case, the production number and John's numbers that he calculates or that he receives annually and keeps track of should be pretty close to the same. I did notice that in the Marina Coast Water District report that they released a couple weeks ago, they used the quarterly reports from the State Water Board to get their production numbers, which will be different than numbers we give you every month, which are what I call the proxy for demand, which are deliveries for customer service, but that's production at the wellhead. So it's true wellhead records. California American reports in their Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project website a slightly different production number because they'll measure it like at the wall when it comes out of the Sand City desal plant. Well, that's similar to what we have too, but they'll measure after the Begonia iron removal plant, whereas we're measuring it before it even gets to Begonia iron removal. So there's going to be a difference in there because we're talking true well production. But at the end of the day, early on when the new reporting regime was going into place, there were some discrepancies. And so the companies filed a few times an amended annual report like this to get it right. And that came as a result of us communicating with each other about, hey, I don't think you're counting the carryover right. Or we raised the issue on Pebble Beach, how it was supposed to be counted. While we were right, they were also right that there was a date that you started at. And so conversations have happened to change these numbers with an amended filing, but the formula never changes. It's just what numbers you populate the formula with.
So my last question on this chain here is that you count pumped water, Cal-Am counts product water. Is that a fair distinction or close?
Yeah, and I would say that Cal-Am counts them both. It's just different things get reported for different purposes.
I got you. Okay. Okay, thank you. And I may have some other questions on the implications, but I'm going to ask the committee if they have any questions, and I'll go to the public.
I do.
Mary, please.
Thank you. So Dave, is there a sunset date on the cumulative carryover credits, or does this go on in perpetuity?
Until the CDO is lifted, as long as there's a balance, the formula says you can use your balance. And that was actually one of the earlier hiccups that we noticed. One of the first versions of this table in the annual filing capped the carryover credits instead of banking it. And so under that situation, if you used it, it would go away and it would fundamentally sunset. Once the conversation that actually involved the state as well, once they said, no, the intent of the language was that you can bank your savings every year. So until we drag this saga out to its conclusion, any savings that you've banked are available. So it will only sunset naturally if you use up all your credits or the CDO has been lifted.
And Cal-Am controls that water at this point.
Yeah.
As it does all the other water, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, what they control is the production from their resources, and you don't control demand, but if your production, so the effective diversion limit, that's what the regulators control. So they say, well, we gave you 8310, but we're taking 1,000 away. Oh, we're taking another 1,000 away. So the uncontrollable is their production to meet customer demand is going to have to follow customer demand. You can't not serve your customers. And so you would either go heavily into conservation or rationing or something if you were coming up to a point where you just couldn't do both, or you end up with penalties under the CDO.
Right. Totally get that. Thank you.
Director Evans, any questions?
No, I have nothing at this time. Thanks.
Can we go out to the public? I may have a couple more questions, but go out to the public, please. Arlene? I'm beginning to think that most people who are following these type of meetings, Zoom or otherwise, are pretty comfortable now with there's going to be questions about public comment. So they should be generally at the ready and know what the steps are. So I don't know that I'm going to be waiting a long time for people to comment. So I just want to give them an opportunity to comment. I'm not going to wait a long time, but then I'm going to close it off. So Arlene, if we're not seeing anything, I'm beginning to develop a pattern for my operation anyway, that I would like to make less time available for that, because they should know when it's time to speak up.
Okay, Chair Riley, I see no hands raised. I'm going to unmute caller number 2. And also, it looks like Catherine Bowie. Those are 2 call-ins. Did you have any comments? Looks like there are no comments, Chair Riley.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to the
and
board.
out of a deference to Catherine, let's refer to her as Catherine Stedman, even though it shows up as Bowie.
Oh, thank you for the correction.
Catherine Stedman. Welcome, Catherine.
I was about to start rumors.
So my last question is, looking at the bottom of your table here where it's 3,700 acre feet, that number will be changing based on the numbers that are put into this category. But Does do you generalize? I mean, I'm trying to remember what you said about how it applies over time, over the future. At 1,000 acre-feet, a step down. That's a step down. Does this look like 3.7 years if nothing else changes? If all the patterns hold?
Yeah, and you know, we track demand, and we've said, you know, last meeting that we're a little over 100 acre-feet above last year. So if you look at last year's, you know, all things being equal, instead of 1,400 acre-feet of excess, maybe we'd have 1,300 acre-feet of excess. So at the end of this water year, you know, September 30th, that number, cumulative carryover credit, could be 5,000.
Okay, and then I understand these things shift, but just as just kind of a postscript on this discussion, if we near the point where we think we may have an opportunity to challenge the CDO, I thought you told me once, and maybe it was in a meeting somewhere, but I thought I heard that State Water Board may not just find a number and then say that's it. They might very well go through a process of 2 or 3 years to be sure that the numbers are holding over time and that their order is kind of effectively creating a time frame or a future frame of comfort. And that may drag out the time frame somewhat.
Yeah, well, my life is very boring. I reread parts of the CD over the weekend, and I don't have it in front of me. There is a page and a paragraph that talks about how they would move forward, but it does appear to open the door to making the case that after a new water supply comes online, that within a very short time, they could lift the order. So rather than have to go a full year, I never said more than a year, but there was concern that we had that they may say, well, okay, you've turned your plant on, but I want to see what this table looks like at the end of the water year with that plant having operated. And I suppose there's always the issue if you turn the plant on in, you know, August 1st and you've only got 2 months of operating history, somebody could say, well, yeah, give us another year. But that would be the limit. But in my discussion with one of the State Water Board staff last week, it looks like there is an open door to allowing it to be lifted based on a plant's come online and looks like it's going to operate as intended.
Okay, and I just, for the benefit of the committee, I just want to share a thought. I'm particularly interested in CDO because I think the dynamic of the COVID-19 restrictions on the economy, I mean, you know, public just circulation and so on, and the economic impacts. I think the CDO and the moratorium that's related to it are real serious barriers to whatever happens in the near future. So as we encounter climate change, and as we encounter kind of emerging out of the COVID-19 kind of struggles we're having right now, it seems to me that the best thing we can do is try to accelerate the elimination of the CDO. And part of that is to give some flexibility to the economic interests in this area so they can look forward to doing things that maybe not be traditional, but maybe creative or maybe new, or it doesn't matter. It's incrementally moving forward. And as long as these barriers exist, then I think we hamstring our local economy. That's where I'm thinking. I just want to add that. Okay. Item number 5, an update on tracking water in the Seaside Groundwater Basin, extracted from and injected into.
Yes, and John Lear is going to carry this one.
Okay. Hello. Arlene, can you give me the ball so I can present my presentation?
Trying to, there we go.
Great.
Oh, you're there. Okay. Let's see if I can. Okay, let's try this. Here we go, John. I'm limited by my monitor size here. That should be fine. There we go.
Great. Thank you. Okay, this is Water Supply Planning Committee item number 5, and that's the end of my presentation. So go back to the beginning of it. Okay, thank you for your patience. So this is an update on the processes for tracking water extracted and injected into the Seaside Groundwater Basin. We want to start with kind of the history. So this was a cartoon that was pulled together back in 1975, where we have the Los Padres Dam and the San Clemente Dam in the upper watershed of the Carmel River watershed. And it would come down and be treated at the iron removal plant. At this point in time, there were the lower valley wells. It says proposed new wells were proposed, and water was brought around to the peninsula to serve demand, and using Forest Lakes Reservoir and also the Forest Lakes tanks, and go into Monterey, and then in Seaside, it was served, demand was served either from the Carmel Valley or by the wells in the Seaside well field. And so we can see kind of that system represented here. So I wanted to come at this from a regulatory standpoint where the board is familiar with that. So these are the targets that were just adopted last quarterly water budget, where we have gone through, and you can see that the 8310 has then had the Seaside native groundwater in addition to that to give us our total for the main system, which will be 10,130. And so obviously some of that's going to come from Seaside and some of that's going to come from the valley wells. And the quarterly water budgets are ways that we, as we talked about in the last item, there are ways that the group and the environmental agencies, as well as the State Water Board, get involved in kind of guidance of where to produce water from the different parts of the resource system in order to comply with all of the regulations and which the regulations are meant to produce water from the system in the most environmentally responsible way. So when we go into this, we build, we've separated our tables into the different sources where we have the Carmel Valley Aquifer, and that is the upper and lower subunits. And we've separated the Seaside Groundwater Basin. So this table tells you what is expected to come out of the Carmel Valley Aquifer and go towards customer demand, and what is envisioned to go out of the Carmel Valley Aquifer and be brought over to the Seaside Groundwater Basin to be stored in the Seaside Groundwater Basin. It also will start having Pure Water Monterey on it as a source of production out of the Seaside Basin to meet customer demand as well. And so this also has Table 13, which I remember there was a question about Table 13. And Table 13 is a water right. It was a table that was developed that was associated with water rights when New Los Padres Dam was going to be built. These water rights, they were an application, and Cal-Am had an application for those rights They went forward to move their rights with the water board. And at the time that they moved forward with that, the water board is now placing in-stream flow requirements, much like our ASR water rights, that flows must be above certain thresholds at different months in order for CalAm to remove water out of the Carmel Valley aquifer system and serve demand. And another stipulation of the Table 13 water rights is it must be used within the Carmel watershed or the city of Carmel. So it is, as Dave would call it, a backward look during the days that you meet those flow requirements. You then would go back and look at your production data and say, you know, just to use example numbers, if we produce 10 units out of the river, and one of those units was consumed in the Carmel Valley aquifer, then 9 of the units would be produced out of the river under the CDO, and 1 of the units would have been produced under Table 13. So that is how that works. And when we look back at the history of production on the peninsula, we can see that it has moved from the river and then direct diversions to pumping, which are the yellow bars, pumping in the Carmel Valley and alluvial aquifer system. And then the red bars represent the Seaside Basin and pumping in the Seaside Basin. And then when we get to the right side of this graph, we start seeing ASR projects in Sand City, DSAL. We start to see more water projects come online. And this is kind of where the question has arrived. There's now water coming in and going out of the Seaside Basin. So how are we tracking that, and what does that look like? We first want to look at what the Seaside Basin is. So if we have a cross section which is A to A prime, we would of this area, we would see that it is a multi-layered system, as Dave was saying, where you have the Aromas dune sands on top of the hatched mark, kind of darker yellow, which is the Paso Robles Formation, and that then sits on the Santa Margarita sandstone. And right here are where our 4 ASR wells are in the Seaside Basin in this little blue zone. So what that looks like is we have the Aromas dune sands, which are all the sands you see out on Fort Ord, then the Paso Robles Formation that sits on top of the Santa Margarita Formation, and here's some relative depths. And this is the stratigraphy of the Seaside Basin underneath our ASR 3 and 4, or the ASR 3 and 4 well site. And then this is what it looks like as you drill down through it, as you can see the changing colors and the changing textures. But the question here was, what kind of waters are going through the Seaside groundwater basin, and what waters are going through the different layers of the Seaside Basin? So for the Aromas dune sands, we actually have brackish seawater that is entering the Aromas sands down near the ocean, and is being collected by the Sand City desalination well field, and then processed and put to the system to meet demand. The Paso Robles Formation, we have rainfall recharge, and we'll also have some pure water Monterey injection. So I forgot to label that right here. So there's the Vados zone wells will be putting water into the Paso Robles Formation, and primarily the water that enters the Paso Robles Formation comes from rainfall. And then water produced out of the Paso Robles Formation are produced by CalAm wells, private wells, and one of the wells that is used currently to water the Bayonet Black Horse Golf Course. The Santa Margarita sandstone does not receive as much aerial recharge. Its recharge zone is back near the backside of Fort Ord, but it receives Carmel River injection via being produced out of the Carmel Valley well field, treated at Begonia Iron Removal Plant, moved over the hill or around through the transfer pipeline, and injected into the ASR well fields. And it also receives pure water Monterey injection, which is the highly treated water produced by the plant near Marina, brought through a pipeline and injected in the newly constructed pure water Monterey well field. The water then is recovered by the CalAm well field, their deeper well fields. The city of Seaside's wells are also in this zone. One of the Bayonet Black Horse Golf Course wells is in this zone. And of course, all of our ASR recovery wells, when they're running in recovery mode, is in this zone. So there's those are listed out in this slide where we have the brackish water. So that's how the water is getting in and how it's moving through here. But then we want to talk about types of water. We have the brackish water, which is the water that is in the Aroma Sands and is pumped by Sand City. And it is actually not a water that's governed by the Seaside adjudication. It doesn't talk about that water. The native groundwater, however, is the water that was or that is governed by the Seaside adjudication. There is right now considered by the decision and the water master 3,000 acre-feet per year of recharge through rainfall that occurs, and so therefore in the Seaside Basin, so there is a 3,000 acre-foot per year allocation of natural safe yield for pumpers to pump, and of that, Cal-Am's share is the 1474 that we often talk about. So that is an annual recharging. Using the average recharge, there's an annual rate that refreshes every year. Then we have the Carmel River ASR, which is, as we said, was brought over from the Carmel Valley and injected into the sandstone and then recovered by wells that are in the sandstone. So it does not have to be recovered by the actual well it was injected into. It may be recovered by any other well that's in the Santa Margarita sandstone, and that water is tracked not on a molecule by molecule level, but on a ledger or a volumetric ledger level. And then now we're going to have Pure Water Monterey, or we do have Pure Water Monterey. That is also going to be tracked and recovered in the same manner as ASR. So there will be a ledger of water going into the ground that is kept, and there is one, and there'll be a ledger of water of Pure Water Monterey that's extracted, and the target will be folded into the quarterly water budget process in order to allow Cal-Am to recover all of the 3,500 acre-feet per year, because it is writing down the effective diversion limit as it's being injected into the ground, not when it's being recovered. So it's critical to build the budget so that there is room in the budget, time, and capacity to produce these waters. There's also an additional piece of water that is going to come into practice here, and it is through an in lieu recharge agreement that the city of Seaside has obtained through the water master, and they went to Superior Court and obtained this judgment that the wells that are currently watering the Black Horse Golf Course and Bayonet Golf Course are going to be taken offline, and the golf courses are now going to be watered with the advanced treated water. At that point in time, the agreement states that the water has been in lieu recharged and then will be available for city of Seaside to put new wells into the Santa Margarita and pump water to support further development. So those would be the different types of water in the Seaside Basin by their jurisdiction, and then also kind of this flow chart at the top shows how they're coming into those different parts of the aquifer. Each of these programs has a monitoring network with it, so we can actually tell physically in the ground. So not only do we track the water volumetrically, we actually track where the water exists in our aquifer system. So we have a Carmel River ASR monitoring network, we have a Pure Water Monterey monitoring network, and then we have a basin-wide monitoring network that allows us to know where these waters are, and we know all of these production wells. So of all the buckets of water that go into the Seaside Basin, these are the wells that we track through Cal-Am, or private well owners, as the district tracks every water producing feature, whether it's a stream or a well, and we total those up. So the water district is keeping ledgers on all of these wells and watching the water extraction out of the Seaside Basin. And then the question was, how is this counted more specifically? And so the Carmel River ASR, when it goes in, we have meters at every wellhead, and we measure injection and extraction. And the meters are read daily when the project is in operation, and we pass the data back and forth from CalAm to us. The Pure Water Monterey has meters at the wellheads. They measure injection and backwash volumes, and they're logged in their SCADA system, in the Monterey 1 water SCADA system. CalAm extraction is measured by meter reads at the wellhead, and the daily totals of those meter reads are reported to the district. And at that point in time, the decision is made whether that extracted water is counted in the native groundwater ledger, the recovered ASR water ledger from the Carmel River, or recovered Pure Water Monterey ledger. So that's the decisions that the quarterly group moves forward and makes in order to assign which to tally the water again, which ledger to tally the water against. And so the water, again, is not need to be the chemistry of the actual water, even though we are tracking the water chemistry and where it migrates underneath the basin and in the aquifer system. And the Sand City desalination has meters at their wellheads that are tracked by SCADA. So you know how much you extract, and then you know how much that gets sent out to the system to meet demand. And the Seaside in lieu water, the project had not started yet, but there will be meter reads at the point of diversion to the Bayonet Golf Course that will be taken. And then there'll be meter reads on the city of Seaside wells that are installed. And those will need to match each other so that the credit of the in lieu bank that they are creating, and they do not take more of that out. So that will need to be tracked and will come online when that project comes online. Then this is a graphic that shows in blue the native water that is reported for the entire, all of the pumpers in the Seaside Basin. And then we can see that the green line on top is actually water in addition that was extracted out of the Seaside Basin, but it was assigned to ASR recovery because you're trying to make the blue line match 3000, but then you have an additional source of water, which is the green line, because you've actually brought that water over, injected it into the basin and stored it, and then gone back and recovered it. And so that is the how we're tracking the water entering and leaving the Seaside Basin.
And before you open it up for questions, I want to add maybe just two other things. There are two classes of pumpers on the Seaside Basin. There's what's called standard producers and alternate producers. Alternate producers can be thought of as folks who demonstrated a history of water use from the Seaside Basin for their own purposes, and the adjudication granted them a continuing right each year to extract that much water. A standard producer is much more like an appropriator who's taking water from the basin for delivery to others, which would be obviously California American Water, the Seaside Municipal System, but EBO, which is Don Orozco, has a well that from the beginning has been treated as a standard producer, and any alternate producer can take a portion of their right and commit to becoming a standard producer. So when we approved permits in Ryan Ranch for the for Chomp Montage to build their new office building, we were in a moratorium on Ryan Ranch. So they went first to Cypress Investors LLC, which is the old Calabrese property that was an alternate producer. And they said, we will convert a piece of our alternate allocation to standard. The standard producers are the ones who've had to take that triennial haircut or step down each year. And so they voluntarily took the haircut, if you will, got down to an amount of water that Chomp needed for their project, sold it to Chomp. We did the same thing for DBO water to do the expansion or the new Women's Center. So the rights that you have as an adjudicated pumper The appropriators took all of the hit for the reductions, but in order to facilitate this trading, if you will, the adjudication did open the door for somebody moving from an alternate to a standard. And so if you had an old sand plant, as an example, and you've now parceled that land off for commercial development, which uses far less water, you're actually sitting on an asset that could be used elsewhere. And so some of these producers have used that right to monetize their asset of water and shift it to someone else. The only other nuance, just while we're giving you the tutorial, is if an alternate producer does not use his annual allocation completely, and think of, let's see, an alternate producer, I guess, McIntosh, Laguna Seca Golf Ranch, they have a set aside. If as an alternate producer, you don't use all of your allocation, all of the unused allocations in a year are kind of pooled together, and then in the subsequent year are made available to the standard producers if they would like to use that water. So you can actually, as a standard producer, exceed your allocation in any given year if there's available carryover from the alternate producers in the prior year. And these are just some of the nuances of how water goes from one user to the other for different purpose. George, you're on mute.
Sorry. The ultimate producer has the more has a stronger right to the water than the standard than the standard producers. So
Yeah, you could think of it that way. Yeah.
Well, but when an alternate producer gives up some of their water to a standard producer, they're dropping down their priority in the priority scheme, but that's only in an adjudicated structure, right? Otherwise, it's just all kind of treated the same. Is that fair?
Well, that's fair pre-Sigma. So if this groundwater basin had not been adjudicated prior to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, then the groundwater sustainability plan would have come in with some framework for how to address, how do you self-adjudicate under a sustainability plan? Groundwater basins typically only start to define who's got a right to what when there's either a lawsuit or now under Sigma, a GSP.
Okay. My other question was, where does the Marina Coast service area dividing line between the district and them in terms of measuring and allocating and using? I mean, could Seaside use some of the Seaside groundwater basin in the Marina Coast delivery area?
No. They have no rights. John, if you have a different opinion, let me know, but they've got no rights. So they can't sink a well in the Seaside Basin and become a producer. Certainly there may come the day that somebody who's got rights may want to become a wholesaler to Marina Coast. That hasn't been broached at all. Not even sure that's possible, but I'm sure people are thinking about it. So Marina Coast has the service obligation in the old Fort Ord, but they can't put a straw in the Seaside Basin.
And Seaside can't use a straw they have to pipe toward Marina Coast.
Well, not to deliver to Marina Coast. Well, that would be the wholesale argument.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. John, what do you think on that one?
I think that Marina Coast has no right to any of the native water. The ASR water from the Carmel River currently right now is in an ASR agreement with Cal-Am, so they will get it all. And the pure water Monterey is controlled under the purchase agreement. So I think they could drill a well, but they couldn't pump it.
Okay. Thank you. I'm assuming over time I'll get more and more clarification, but anyway, thanks for the tutorial. Any other questions from the committee?
I'd just like to make one comment. Thanks, John, for putting that together. It was very clear and very, I think it distilled down a lot of heady stuff. So thanks for doing that. That's all I have.
Thank you, Molly, too. Am I muted or not?
No, you're good.
Okay. I'll ask if there's any comments from the public, any question, any clarifications? I'm going to allow the public to interrupt us if they can kind of show us.
I see no raised hands.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll return it back to the committee. Item number 6 is the table 13 water rights. Another
Okay.
tutorial.
Yeah, John covered quite a bit of it. I think the important takeaways are when our application that became water right 2808, which we still hold, was approved back in 1995. The other claimants to historical water rights on the Carmel River watershed were given an opportunity to basically demonstrate their previous beneficial use. And the goal was to make the district's new water right junior to those previously existing water rights. So almost simultaneous with Order 9510 was the, I've lost my number, it's in the staff note, decision 1632. And in that decision, a document was created about 4 pages of a table, and it was table 13. And the names of all of these people who had raised their hand and said, wait, we've got water rights. We want to be heard, and we want to make sure that we're protected in a senior position. They were all thrown on a table 13. The State Water Board gave them time to prove their claim. Some did, some didn't. And then in 1997, so almost 2 years later, the State Water Board issued what I attached as Exhibit 6A. And as you can imagine, there's some folks in 6A that completely make sense to you. Carmel Valley Ranch, for one. You go all the way to the end and you'll find Wolter at the bottom of, I think, the 3rd page. Well, Wolter was the property that was slated to become the dog park off of Carmel Valley Greens, right there by Quail Lodge. So a number of these folks, all the way back in the 90s said, yeah, I want to prove my water and work with me. Well, California American was really the first to accept their new water right back in 93, I think it was. I'm sorry, 2013. And what you can notice from it is in their table, they had over 2,000, let's see, what was that number? Go to the glasses. 2,900 acre feet, and their water right came in at 1,482. So the process of approving these Table 13 water rights resulted in really kind of 3 things: a reduction in the amount of water that's actually issued as a right, and the 2 things that John alluded to in the previous, which is a specific season of diversion that's limited seasonally, and a limitation on use that remain in the Carmel Valley and City Carmel. So the water right became very restrictive. And so because a Table 13 water right is deemed to be an appropriate water right, there were some users who were offered their water right who then rejected, said, whoa, it's too restrictive. We're going to remain our riparian pumper based on rights we believe we've proven. We're not going to accept the state's Table 13 appropriative water right, and we're just going to go it on our own, so to speak. So there's been a couple of those, and then most of the other applications, many of them have not been consummated and many have been canceled. But that's kind of the nature of table 13. So we throw it around like, oh, it's something. It just happened to be the next table number that came up when they got to that point in addressing the decision. So Exhibit 6B it's a little bit old. It's from 2015, but I tried to use it as an example of how all these things fit together. And let's see if I can. So what you see in the top half of Table 6B are some of those Table 13 water rights holders, and Cal-Am's kind of right in the middle. So then, and Larry Hampson prepared this, but I've kind of kept it around because I think it's instructive. So the total without the Cal-Am, because Cal-Am's actually had their Table 13 issued, kind of represents what's out there for potential Table 13 water rights holders. Then you see the current licenses and water rights that Cal-Am has. And you get down to the fourth one, okay, that is what happened to their original Table 13 request. That's where the 2,900 goes down to the 1,400, 1,482. So the 1, 2, 3, fourth column of numbers is kind of where things ended up. Then you see our two ASR water rights, again, staying kind of in this fourth column. So now you see the subtotal of Cal-Am and us, and then the remaining Table 13 water rights holders from above. In Larry's case, he compared that 1256 number to the 6-year average at the time, down in footnote 7. And he said, well, then the remainder must represent the non-Cal-Am, non-district, non-Table 13 water rights holders. And that's estimated at this 1,071. And so that would include things like the perfected license for Malpaso. Big Sur Land Trust inherited, as part of the Malpaso transaction, a second right for irrigation only. And then the other non-Cal-Am pumpers who are pumping off the river but aren't on Table 13. And so at Thursday's Water Demand Committee meeting, we'll be talking a little bit about the non-Cal-Am pumpers and what happens when Cal-Am gets down to their legal right, the 3,376 acre feet. Then the non-Cal-Am pumpers become even more important, whether they're potential Table 13 water rights holders or non-Table 13 existing pumpers. And so this is just kind of the mix of what's out there. At some point, we did establish a limit on Cal-Am's extractions, and I think Director Evans brought this up when she read the two well reports in last month's board packet. But we also established a limit for the non-Cal-Am pumpers. Well, since that time, we've modified the Cal-Am limits based on the adjudication and the CDO, but we've never gone back and really modified the non-Cal-Am pumpers. So that's something that just even this question of how does it all work reminded us as we went back in to look at this table and the other tables, which is at some point we need to relook at what maybe the 10-year non-Cal-Am pumping has been, how much of the Table 13 holders are actually pumping, are they ever likely to perfect their Table 13 right, will they ultimately move off that Table 13 and so forth. But this was just a question that was raised, and now every month when John's report shows Table 13, you kind of know where it came from historically. And that's all I have.
I have one more question. The unresolved, those with Table 13 rights that are unresolved in terms of the category they want to be in or the establishment of the right through, the State Water Board. Does there need to be anything done on that, or can that just be dealt with as a water user idea, permit, whatever, comes forward and then you can kind of deal with it? Or should something be done to kind of set the foundation more clearly, or? can you
Yeah,
put it
well,
as needed?
yeah, John, okay, yeah, I think it'll come up. So if you look at, Hacienda Carmel Community Association, I think they're going to just continue to sit and do what they do, and maybe never move. Quail Lodge was one of those where they were offered the Table 13 water right, but the restrictions, because of the seasonality of use of your golf course, you're trying to irrigate in the high summer months. And what Table 13, the issuance of the Table 13 right, basically takes you off the river during those summer months. So it became unworkable for them to say, okay, we'll take it. I talked about Walter, the water rights analysis we did on the Walter properties. I believe there's 9 parcels there. They can maintain and subdivide, relying on their riparian right. And if you're providing water for domestic supply, you need it week in and week out. And so it's hard to accept an interruptible water right if you need that water in the other times of the year. So a number of these have very little incentive to ever convert it to a Table 13 water right.
Is it possible, let's assume we're 10 years down the road, there's a water supply, the CDO is lifted or whatever. Can any of these Table 13 just convert to another water supply and not have to rely on seasonality?
Well, yeah, they could just connect to the CalAm system.
Yeah, that's kind of my question.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Whether they want to or not is a different question, because it's a cost issue and availability and so on. Any other committee questions on this item?
I don't have any. I just thank you for the explanation.
I noticed that Sarah Hardgrave is on, and I think I gave her bad information earlier today, because I just, in looking at this exhibit, I see Eastwood is still in there at 131.8. So the Big Sur Land Trust is down at the bottom, but the Malpaso is still up here in this top half. So sorry for taking the committee's time to tell Sarah, but it kind of got split into 2 places. Eastwood is Malpaso.
So Sarah, call Dave tomorrow if you want more.
But they had already gotten a license with no seasonality barriers. So that's why the Malpaso entitlement made so much sense to property owners to purchase.
Oh, makes sense.
Thank you so much for this. I've always, Table 13 has eluded me, but I feel like I have a far better handle on it now. Thank you so much for it. It was clear and fascinating. And I'm sure each one of these has a great story behind it.
And it can only be used in your district.
And am I not the lucky one?
I'm going to go to number 7, and if there's any member of the public want to chime in, give a signal. Anyway, so item 7 is suggested items to be placed on future agendas of this committee. Does any committee member have an idea or a desire?
I'm sure I'll come up with something in the future, though.
Well, for me personally, I think these items that are on today's agenda are from me kind of raising questions over the past couple of meetings. And anyway, and I thank you, Dave, and staff and others who kind of contributed to all this. It's a wealth of information. There's little curiosity pieces, but also substantive pieces all merged here. And I just appreciate being educated and being informed. I hope I remember a lot of it.
Well, we'll probably have to do it again in a couple of years for some new board members, right?
That, yeah, every biennially. Any other comments from the public or from board committee members?
I see no raised hands.
Okay, I'm ready to declare this committee meeting over unless I hear something from Mary. All right, I know you're laughing because this is the end. All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, all of you, everybody, and staff in particular, because it was a lot of time invested in preparing all this information. I appreciate it.
Good.
Yes, thank you, staff.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. See you again.
Okay.
Bye-bye.